Thank you. Your Excellence, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends of the Cultural Endowment of Estonia, I'm bringing you the congratulations and good wishes of your younger sister from across the sea. The Finnish Cultural Foundation is only 75 years old. As a proof of this, I have given or brought you as a small gift our history, which was published just 3 months ago when we had our 75th birthday. In fact, it's not quite self-evident that I'm here, because when I was a few hours ago on my way to the Helsinki harbor, I got jammed in a lift, locked up, something which has never happened to me before, but they got me out in 10 minutes, so I'm luckily here. I'm going to share with you some experiences of us on foundation life, foundation world. I'm sure many of those aspects of our activities are familiar to you here, but some may not be. And I think it's always good to compare life in different countries, different foundations. Even if you are not willing to learn from others, you can always be happy that you don't have the same difficulties as the others have. The Finnish Cultural Foundation was established in 1939 by a nationwide collection. So this is a national, though private, foundation. Some 30,000 school children went from door to door in every village of the country and collected the initial capital. The purpose of the foundation in our charter is, in Finnish, suomalaiskansallisen, henkisen ja taloudellisen viljelyn vaaliminen ja kehittäminen. So that's national Finnish culture. A rather complicated way of putting it. We might like to change it nowadays, but it's impossible because the charter also says that the name and purpose of the foundation may never be changed. National Finnish culture in the late 1930s in Finland meant, in plain Swedish, it's not meant for Swedish speakers. So this foundation was born from envy of some younger members of the Fennoman movement who were fighting for Finnish language in the universities where the Swedish was dominant at that time. So they realized how much money the Swedish-speaking foundations in Finland had per capita, so they wanted to establish a Finnish-speaking foundation. No one in the 1930s could have guessed that we have in Finland Chinese or Russian students studying in Finnish universities and what should be done with them. Nowadays we give grants to students and scholars and artists in every language, even Swedish speakers, though they rarely apply from us because it's so much easier for them to get from the Swedish-speaking foundations. Just some basic facts of the foundation. Unlike many other big European foundations, we still focus on grants to individuals. So some 2,500 grants every year to individual scholars and artists, and less to groups and bigger projects. About half of the money goes to arts, half to science. The competition is very hard. About 10% of the applicants get a grant. Increasingly we are giving also larger grants, but rarely over 200,000 euro. And then we have a few programs of our own. I'll come back to that in a while. We have a central fund. Here is some of the activities we have. Lectures, an international singing competition, art collection, and money, instrument bank collection of very expensive violins and cellos. So we have a central fund, and 17 regional funds, about 800 donor funds. So a minimum capital of 100,000 euro is required for a donor fund. The regional funds have their own boards, so they are independent in giving out the money, but the central fund is taking care of the capital and the investments. Here is just a map of the regional funds. So it's very much divided according to the provincial distribution of Finland. So our foundation is private, with no link to government or public resources. It is independent, as I think most foundations want to be, whatever the juridic form. What does it mean to be independent? Is that possible in a world where now everything depends on others? It's partly possible for us because we have a sizable capital producing enough revenue. Not every year. Here you have the return of our investments from 1960s to the present day. You see the best returns are some 50 or 60% per year, but there are also years with almost 30% losses every year. But in the long run, it still pays to have an investment portfolio of this kind based on equities. Because we have such a long horizon, we can act counter-cyclically. We don't have to sell when the prices are down. Between 2007 and 2009, for some 18 months, we were losing 1 million euro per day without doing anything. And then in the spring of 2009, the tide turned back and the money began to flow in. And as you see, we have now reached about the same value where we began in 2007. And at the same time, we have always given out some 35 million euro per year. Are we then dependent on donors? Yes and no. We get on average some 10 million euros per year as donations, mainly from wills, so bequests, from testaments. And as I said, we have now about 800 donor funds and about a dozen new ones every year. Some of them can be big. Just a few weeks ago we received a will of 9 million euros. But super rich people are not the key factor for us. There are too few of them in Finland. They usually have children, and if they want to favor the public good, then they tend to establish their own foundations. Our ecological niche are ordinary middle-class Finns who love culture and who don't have children, so no direct heirs. Many of them don't wish their estate to go to distant relatives or to the state. They are not rich as long as they live, but as you may know, in Finland people usually own their own houses. So when they die and the house, the apartment can be sold, that will very easily bring in the 100,000 euros, which is the minimum requirement for a donor fund. We can guarantee for them a lasting memory and the gratitude of future generations. And as part of that bargain, we also take care of hundreds of graves in different graveyards all over Finland. Some donors may have very specific wishes on the use of their money. For example, they may only support the study of one particular language or one disease, or only violin players who are aged under 20 and need to buy a bow, or sober actors from the province of Tavastland, or young men with unblemished behavior. There is one fund which supports connections between Estonia and Finland, and one between South Africa and Finland. We follow these wishes whenever it's possible, and sometimes we then have to decline an offer. We have to refuse to take some money because the conditions are too cumbersome for us. They are not suitable for our strategy. So, new donations are important for us, but they are not decisive any longer, because the capital has grown big enough. So the large number of donors saves us from the despotic will of any individual donor. But even this independence is relative, because if we behaved in a totally irresponsible way, which the people of Finland would regard contrary to our mission, the donations would soon dry out. So it's important for us to have the confidence of donors at large, if not individuals. And this would help us to keep on the right track, even if our conscience didn't do it already. Some people donate money, others donate their time. We are more dependent on experts who are assessing the applications for us. In addition to the Board of Trustees and the regional boards, we have an army of external experts who work all pro bono for us. In the Central Fund, there are 40 panels, 20 in the arts, 20 in the sciences. Always the chair comes from our board, and then there are 2 external experts from outside. Does the composition of the panels affect the outcome? Here I'll show you a couple of quite interesting slides, graphs. They are really new. I myself saw these a week ago for the first time, and I was astonished. The 2 lower curves are the percentage of women as experts. The red curve is arts and the blue is sciences. You see the number of women is now almost 50%. It's between 40 and 50%. And then the upper curves is the index of women receiving grants, so that the index number 100 is the proportion of women of applications. And then the grants are indexed against that. So every time women get an index more than 100, they get more than they receive, or more than they deserve. And then if it's below 100, then it's less than they deserve, less than the proportion of the applications. And it really seems to be some link between the 2 curves, the 2 green curves, and perhaps even between the 2 red curves. This is quite complicated, because then if you look at the lower green curve and see that the proportion of women as experts has risen from 20 to 45, 50, and in the same period there is no trend in the proportion of women as grant receivers. So between 2003 2014 it has always been about 100. So the link may after all be not that clear, but anyway I think this gives us some food for thought. Again, the basic principle is the same. This time we are comparing experts and applicants from the metropolitan area and from outside the metropolitan area. As you see, our experts have tended to come from the Helsinki area. 10 years ago about 80%, now between 50 and 70%. And it's clear that applicants from the metropolitan area always receive more than their share of the application. So the index is always above 100, even 130, which is a very clear difference, much more than the difference between men and women. Again, we can't say what is the reason, but it's something to be kept in mind. The problem with experts is that when their special knowledge is very deep, the horizon becomes narrow. The larger picture may be lost. That's why we are looking at experts who have a broad mind, and in the last resort we hope that the common wisdom of the many experts and of the board will save us from the whims of an individual expert. The outsiders are changed every year. The task falls on a person just once in a lifetime. Without these experts, we would get into trouble. Again, no one person can influence us, but we can't risk to lose the goodwill of the academic and cultural field at large. What can we then do with our precious independence? We can quickly accommodate to new circumstances because we are not tied to narrow interests. We can keep in mind the larger perspectives, avoiding partial optimization. And we can act counter-cyclically, supporting phenomena which are not popular just now, either because they are too old or because they are too new, but they may be important in the future. Foundations should not be trend followers. I must mention that in the 1980s my foundation was supporting Professor Lennart Meri when he visited Finland. He lived and worked in apartments owned by my foundation, and his expenses were covered by the Finnish Cultural Foundation. Although we usually advertise our support very widely, this was a kind of support that was not advertised publicly, but was made silently at that time. Foundations are long-term investors, and they are not harassed by creditors. If we hoard riches responsibly in good times, we don't need to cut our spending when both the government and the private sector are short of money. Every euro we spend in bad times, it's worth much more than a euro spent in good times. I'm sorry, that's in Finnish, but that's the returns of our capital in decades. You see, from the last 4 decades, 2 have been very good and 2 have been very bad. But we have been hoarding the surplus so we can use them in bad times, like the past 5 or 10 years. And as you see, here is our expenditure from 2007, when there was a crash in the investment market, and you see that our expenditure has kept very much the same for all the time. This year it's about 40 million euro. And the capital is some 1.3 billion euros. There was a very rapid increase in our assets in the 1990s, when American pensioners were buying Nokia shares from us at the price which was 10 times what it's now. And after that increase, in the beginning of the new millennium, we found ourselves within Finnish cultural life in a situation which was compared to Germany in the global setting. A financial giant, but a political dwarf. This led us 10 years ago to assume a more active role, initiating campaigns and larger programs which were not based on applications sent to us, but were planned and organized from our own office. We have motivated municipalities to buy more books for public libraries. We have brought thousands of school children to theater and opera, initiated a restructuring of language teaching for immigrants in Finland, supported Finno-Ugric minority languages in the Russian Federation, trying to renew the Russian primary education system, which is not an easy task, I can tell you, and so on. Many of these campaigns have a social or regional aspect. We are helping people who for some reason can't apply themselves for our support. Culture has one major drawback compared with other valuable fields of public spending. We all know what is good health, although we may disagree on the best system which would produce good health. There is no problem in defining clean air or clean water, although not everyone is willing to sacrifice as much to protect the environment from pollution. But there is no agreement whatsoever on what is good culture. Artistic projects, which some people think are fantastic, may be despised by others, and vice versa. That's why it's extremely difficult to set strategic targets in cultural policy, either for us or for the government, or to defend culture against budgetary cuts. We have to support a range of work which may represent totally opposite values and aims. The Finnish Cultural Foundation is not a passive money box of artists or scholars. We don't support them just to keep them employed and alive, but to help them produce art and research which benefits the Finnish people. Nor are we the goodwill branch of Finnish industry. We represent the interests of those people who have given us their money. That's ordinary Finns who love culture. My message is that independence is a good thing, but never a total independence. Foundations are more useful when they can act independently and with their fiscal benefits. But if they didn't act responsibly and for the public benefit, they would lose the public support and sooner or later also their legal benefits, and that would be only fair. Although we are not dependent on voters or customers, it's good that politicians and enterprises are, because democracy and market economy may, in the short run, lead to unwise decisions, but in the long run they save us from colossal mistakes, both in politics and in culture. Foundations stand between democracy and markets. They are undemocratic, which can make them unselfish, so they can look after common good and public benefit without partisan prejudices. Foundations can never replace states or markets, and they shouldn't. They are far too small. All the European foundations together spend as much on research in a year than the European states in a few days. But with carefully selected projects, foundations can help to set agendas and to focus attention on problems which they think should be solved next. The general trend among the world's foundations now is to move from traditional philanthropy towards problem solving and more strategic thinking. Instead of giving money to poor or sick people, they want to eliminate poverty and diseases altogether. There are today many foundations, especially in the United States, which plan to spend down their assets within a limited time. When all the money is gone, they abolish themselves. The reason is quite rational. If you know how to achieve your aims, why delay it for decades? However, not all foundations can be suicidal. Finnish arts and science are not problems which should be eliminated as soon as possible. That's why I believe the Finnish Cultural Foundation will have many useful years ahead, quite as the Cultural Endowment of Estonia. Thank you.